Language variation. I hope you remember we discussed in one of our early lectures that language has traveled a long distance over the several periods of time, and it has changed in style, it has changed in sounds, it has changed in structures. Now let's see how language has changed in different aspects. Language variation, that is what we're going to discuss in today's lecture. But we have to look at what we talked about in the last lecture. That let's look at the review of lecture number 26. Conversation analysis. We talked about the conversation style. We talked about the definition of conversation, that is the study of recorded, naturally occurring talk in interaction. When people interact, whatever they say, that is conversation. Marginally interested in language as such, that is conversation analysis. It is interested in language, but first and foremost in language is the practical social accomplishment. They talk about the accomplishments. They talk about the social accomplishments, how socially people interact and what they achieve out of that social interaction. Its object of study is the interactional organization of social activities, how the social activities are organized, how they are communicated about. So that is the main object of study of conversation analysis. Conversation analysis aims at discovering how participants understand and respond to one another in their turns at talk, with a central focus on how sequence of actions are generated. They talk with each other in taking their turns, and we studied the term turn, taking turns. Now, taking turns, you remember, it means that you take your turn when it's your time to speak. And when you're giving turn to somebody else to speak, you are quiet, you stop your speech, and then you give chance to the other to talk. Throughout the course of conversation or talking interaction, speakers display in the next turns an understanding of what the prior turn was about on assumptions of the analyst. Now, the analyst, the one who is analyzing that conversation, assumes that when a person has taken a turn, he has the knowledge of what happened in the last turn. That is what is meant by the in the next turn, an understanding of what the prior turn was about on the assumptions of the analyst. So when you take turn, you know that what happened in the last turn. So that is how, and you keep a relevance to the talk in relevance to the last turn, and that is how the conversation develops. Turn taking. Conversation analyzed in turns, one speaker, then the next. The rules. The turn consists of one or more turn constructional units. We talked about this term TCU, the end of the turn. Constructional unit is a point during a turn when another speaker can intervene. This point is called TTRP, turn transitional relevant point, the point at which it's a time for the next speaker to speak. Then there are three possibilities. We talked about the current speaker selects the next speaker, or if this does not operate, the next speaker self-selects the time to speak, or if this does not operate, the current speaker may continue. If he doesn't want to continue, he doesn't continue, but he may continue if nobody has taken turn, if he hasn't given a turn to the other speaker, or the other speaker hasn't taken the turn to speak. So the three possibilities of turn taking. Components, we talked about the turn construction units. Features of turn construction units like projectability, transition relevant place. Projectability, it is possible for participants to project in the course of a turn construction unit what sort of unit it is and at what point it's likely to end. So they give an indication what type of turn it is and where it is going to end. Then we had TRP at the end of each unit, transitional relevance place. There is a possibility of legitimate transition between speaker, a common experience that at the end of one speech, at the end of one speaker's turn, there is a legitimate change of speakers, there is justified change of speakers, the other speaker takes a turn. So this is a common experience again. If current speaker selects the next speaker in current turn, then current must stop speaking and the next must speak next. So this is basically the rule, that if you are giving turn to your friend, you have to be quiet. If current does not select the next, then any other party self-selects, first speaker gaining rights to the next turn. So if the current speaker doesn't give a chance, then any other party can take a chance, and the first speaker has the right to speak when the second speech finishes. If current has not selected next, then no other party self-selects, and then current may continue, but needn't, right? Needn't continue. If he doesn't want to continue, he doesn't continue, or she doesn't continue, but he may or she may continue if nobody has taken a turn. Then we talked about the basic turn types, like the adjacency pairs, a famous question-answer, greeting, exchange by greeting, invitations, acceptance. You invite somebody, the other person accepts or declines. Offer, acceptance, you offer something to somebody and you offer. Maybe in common life we say that we offer somebody to take a tea with us, or offer somebody a gift. The other person may accept or may refuse, and there would be different kinds of conversation in this. Self-initiated, self-repair, other-initiated, self-repair. Then we talked about the repairs. How sometimes the sentences which may cause trouble, the wrong sentences or out of context sentences are uttered, and then there is a repair. So it could be done by the speaker himself, it could be done by the listener, it could be indicated by the listener and the speaker would correct, or it could be indicated by the speaker and the listener would correct. So these are different occasions or different ways to do the repair work. Self-initiated self-repair, other-initiated self-repair, self-initiated other-repair, other-initiated other-repair. So these are different occasions, different ways to conduct the repair work. Repair in speech is of course important. When you utter something out of context, then it must be repaired. So these are different ways to do the repair. Then we talked about another turn, that was interruptions, how interruption occurs and the speaker while speaking gets an interruption from the other speaker. So that is of course considered inappropriate, and the fluency of the speech is disturbed when there is interruption. Overlapping, when sometimes the listener repeats some of the speaker's words. So there is an overlapping speech and some of the words are repeated. So these were the two terms we discussed in towards the end of the lecture, like which we had on conversation analysis. Now today, moving on again to the changes in language. We know over the period of different periods of history, language has changed because of maybe mixing of cultures, or maybe movement of people into different cultures, or maybe mixing of languages, languages being changed under the influence of other languages. So language variation. What is language variation and how the language has changed, and what are the different aspects of language change? Now let's first take the first slide, introduction. Language not the same we had in the past. Naturally, over the period of history, we have seen different languages, and a language which we are using now was not understood by the people in the past. And the people in the past had, of course, a language which we can't understand now. So language is not the same as we had in the past. It has undergone several changes, many changes, under so many influences, under so many factors, there have been so many factors that have influenced language and have caused changes in the language. A modern reader may not be able to understand a single word or line written in a newspaper written 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, of course, the language was different. We've seen so many varieties of language in the study of literature. We've seen so many languages, so many kinds of languages, so many words which we don't understand now, and we have to go into the context of that period, or we have to go maybe consult the dictionary of that period to see what the language means. Specimen, we have a specimen from the past, like forgive us, sir, guilt. No, these words we can't understand now, but it's one of the specimen from a language in the past, one of the specimens which we found in one of the old languages. and now today we can't understand this language, we can't understand what this sentence means. So the same way, you have so many millions and billions of sentences and many varieties of languages which we can't understand now. Now, why do the changes occur, or how do the changes occur? Changes occur because they are natural. Naturally, as human behavior changes, generations are coming, new generations are coming, under the influence of media nowadays, under the influence of different nationalities coming and living together, like in the multicultural societies or the multinational societies, people going for job purposes, people going for business, they are interacting with each other. So in the process of this interaction, they are speaking their own languages and they are learning the other languages. So this is a very natural process. As human behavior changes, same way languages change. Language in the state of constant variation because it is transmitted from one generation to the next. Same way, when generations come, languages are transmitted, and some of the words are thought to be inappropriate to use. They are thought to be old words, obsolete words. Some words have gone into the past, new words have been coined. Some new generations are not using the old words. It's because of the influence of, mainly due to the influence of media, mainly due to the influence of TV programs or movies. You have new languages coming up. So there is a lot of bombardment of new languages in the bombardment of the media, especially the technology. Some new words have come to origin, and many new words have vanished. So this change is slow, but it's sure. Definitely languages are changing. Language must change. This is what is a very famous quote, that language has to change, language must change. Languages are subject to changes. You can't really imagine that one language which was there in the millions of years ago is still alive. Definitely there would be so many changes. Even in the British Standard English, you have now changes. Even now you have so many other Englishes with small e, Pakistani English or Chinese English or Indian English. So under this influence, now we can say that language change is slow but sure. Language is definitely changing. Sometimes it is unnoticed and becomes prominent over a long period of time. Sometimes this change we can't really experience in our everyday life. It's unnoticed. We don't really consider seriously whether the language is changing, or there were so many other words which are no more spoken now, no more used now. But definitely it becomes evident, or it becomes prominent over a long period of time. In years and years, sometimes we get to know that there was such a language which has disappeared. So languages are changing. The change is slow but sure, and over a long period of time, sometimes it becomes evident. It is not noticed clearly. It is not noticed. It is not a noticeable change, but definitely the change is there, and over a long period of time, sometimes it becomes evident or clear that yes, the language is subject to changes. Some changes linked to social and political changes. Now, some of these changes are because of the mixing up of cultures and mixing up of societies. People from different societies coming and living together. So when they live together, they interact with each other. They speak their words, and they learn new words from the other people. So this is how some new words, they enter the language, and some new words are coined, and some new words, they come to origin. And then some changes are because of the political changes. Of course, when the political changes occur, there are social changes and economic changes as well. So because of these economic changes and social changes, the writers, the press people, the media people, they are influenced, and they start using those words because they are projecting those changes in their writings or in their programs, on TV programs or in the newspapers. You hear so many new words which are because of the political changes, which are because of the culture developed because of political change. Like you have ism, so many Urdu words, you just put ISM with that, like Gundaism. Like, these words there are so many words which have entered now English, and they are being used in Pakistani English, and they are a mixture of Urdu and English. Just you put the ISM with that, and you develop a word. You generate a word, and you start using that word. Goes into media, and that media people or the press people, they start using those words. So under the political changes also, sometimes the writers, they under the influence of those political changes, they project those changes, they project the changes which have occurred because of the political unrest situation, or such situations which are disturbing for people. They take all that situation, and they write columns in the newspaper. They project all those changes in their writings. So again, we get some new words under the influence of political changes. So changes, they are sometimes because of the mixing up of cultures, mixing up of societies, and sometimes due to the political influence or the political changes. Conditions of unrest in Pakistan. You have so many new words coming into the news now, and you're learning these words, and you don't realize that they don't belong to English. They are just a mixture of Urdu and English. So this is why we see that changes definitely are there in language because of the social and political changes. Every next generation has to learn the way its previous generation used language. Again, every next generation is learning how the language use was there in the past, how their elders, they used to use certain words or use certain sentences. So if they know, then of course there is a flow, and they would also know about the languages gone in the past, and they would again compare with the language they are using. So every next generation has to learn how the words or sentences were used in the past. Man picks up some words exactly and some words approximately. He then recreates for himself language of community. He creates a change. So what is man doing basically? He's picking up some words exactly from the past, and some words approximately, some words in a bit change shape, and man is creating new words. We do that. We learn some of the words. We get to listen some of the words from the past, and we pick them as they are. And sometimes we in different dialects, we have so many words which are spoken in a different way, and then there are some words which are spoken in one culture and they are not spoken in the other culture. So we get to know different words coming from different cultures, and we pick them up, some of them exact and some of them approximate, and then we create new words. We generate new words, and that is the language of community. Overall, people start using on large scale that language, and this is what is called change. Language has changed. This means language has changed, and it is basically now, it could be called a mixture of some of the words which came from the past, some of the new words. That is what is called a gradual change in language. Language changes gradually. It can't change all of a sudden, because with the movement into the time and generations coming, next generations coming, they are picking some words gradually, and they are using those words, they are mixing those words in their language, and this is how gradually they are learning new language, and they in the end they have a language which is being spoken on large scale, and we experience that this is a changed language, and we can say that this change is not all of a sudden, but this change has occurred gradually over many years and many centuries. Now, there is also a desire to sound different from previous generation. One of the reasons why languages change, or why generations they change language, there is a desire, a sound desire inside a person to sound different, to look different. Man wants to be different, man wants to look different, man wants to sound different. So man wants, it's a trend in the society that people, they want to be different from each other. So that is why they sometimes use such words which they sometimes which are not there in their own language. They use such words just to look different, just to sound different. In our common experience, we see that when we are when we are among friends, while talking in Urdu, we mix some of the English words in that, just to sound modern or just to sound educated. So this is how sometimes these words, they become a part of Urdu, and Urdu has taken so many words from English now as well. So just because there is a desire, in everybody to sound different, to to give a different image, maybe an image of an educated person, so we are mixing up English words in our Urdu. So just because of that desire that we want to be different from others. Change can be in the pronunciation sometimes, meaning as well, and use. Sometimes we start pronouncing the words differently. We start pronouncing them in a very stylish way, just to sound different or just to sound modern. Meaning, change can also be in the meaning. Sometimes some words, they now have acquired different meaning. They had a different meaning in the past, and gradually with the scientific changes or scientific advancements, new words were coined and new articles were invented, and for that different words, we started using different words. Or even in the use, some of the words, they had a different use in the past, and now we have a different use for such words. These words, the words are being used for some other thing. You can note down that words have changed for kitchen, washroom, bedroom, restroom. You have different words now for kitchen, you have different words for washroom, you have different rooms for bedroom, words for bedroom, even different words for restroom, retiring room, or resting room. You have different words for even for bedroom, for washroom, for kitchen. So new words are now being coined, and now new words are coming gradually. They are entering the language, and even their use has changed, and now some words, they have a different use. They are being used for different objects or different phenomena or even different activities. So change neither for good nor for bad. Why is language changing? Why are we changing the words? Why are we introducing new words in our language? Not for good purposes, not for bad, but just for suitability, just for the need. We need to use these words. Sometimes under social pressures, we use different words. Just sometimes in order to sound, not to sound uneducated, we use different some new words. Sometimes in order to finish the unsuitability, just for suitability, we use a different word. We are in a social gathering, and we would not like to use some of the words. We would go for some new words, some words which are used in that very social gathering or in that class of society. So for the need, we need to use, because we need to live in that culture. We need to feel comfortable in that culture. We need to be adjusted in that culture, or need to be adjusted in that social class. So we stopped using some of the words which were used in the past, and now we are learning new words and new habits. Even we've changed the gestures for new cultures, for new social classes. We have even changed the gestures. Our non-verbal language is also changing, and we have different gestures for different things now. Language change can be studied along two lines. Let us study language change. Let us see what changes have occurred and how they have occurred. We would divide this study into two parts, diachronic and synchronic. Very familiar terms from one of the past lectures. Diachronic related with history, and synchronic horizontal study and study of the language as it is. Diachronic, as the language has changed over the period of time. Now, very familiar example, some old familiar people, Chaucer, Milton, T.S. Eliot. Now the language which was used by Chaucer in the Old English was different from Milton, the language used by Milton, and then in turn Milton's language was different from T.S. Eliot. So three people who belong to the Old English, Middle English, and the New English or Modern English. Chaucer had a very different language. And even if we read now Chaucerian texts, we see that that language is very difficult to understand, and it's under the influence of Latin and French. So that language was absolutely different. And then gradually moving through the Middle Ages, we saw Milton. Milton's language was a bit easy to understand. It was different from Chaucer's language. And then again coming on to the modern era, T.S. Eliot. Now T.S. Eliot's language was absolutely different from the other two, language of the other two people. T.S. Eliot's language is much easier and it belongs to the modern era. So this is how historically we see the development of language, how it has moved through the periods of history. Old English, Middle English, Modern English. Now diachronic variations. Let's see some more diachronic variations. As students of descriptive linguistics, we are more interested in synchronic descriptions, because now we see that synchronic study is much preferred, because we deal with the language as it is. That is natural language, that is our language. So as students of basically descriptive linguistics, definitely you would be interested more in these synchronic descriptions rather than diachronic descriptions. So because synchronic descriptions are basically those synchronic language, synchronic approach is that approach which deals with the language as it is with us, as it is at that period of time. But first let's look at some of the diachronic variations, and then we'll look at synchronic variations later. Meaning changed sometimes due to its continuous use in particular context. Sometimes meaning is changed due to its continuous use in particular context. Sometimes when you're using a word in a particular context continuously, sometimes the meaning changes, the meaning of that word changes, because new things enter and new objects enter the world, and then the meaning is changed, and people, as they start using more words, different words for that object, so the meaning of the word changes, and that word may be associated with some other thing. Sometimes form remains same but meaning changes because the object changes. Like you have a very familiar example here, pen. Pen meant feather in the past, and then we had quill for writing later. The quill, or the people used to write with feathers, with the tip of the feathers, or the quill. The word given was quill. So quill was like later people started writing with the feather, and pen meant feather in the past. But then after that, when pens were invented, pen had a different meaning now. Pen had a different object to refer to. So pen was associated with a new pen, or the device which we had for the writing. So quill for writing later. Pen, the meaning of pen changed in later when there were pens invented for writing. There were particular devices for writing. So now feather had a different meaning, and feather was called feather. So pen changed, the meaning of the word pen changed. Then we have the second type of variation, extension. Taken place in a large number of words, like extension meant journey. In the past, journey meant just a day's walk or a ride. One day walk or ride would be taken as a journey. Then journal meant a periodical that appeared every day. Why was it called journal? Because it was related with journey. So every day, whatever the paper that appeared every day, a periodical that appeared every day, was called journal because it appeared every day. And since the word journey in the past meant a day's walk, now a journey may be a week's journey, or a half-yearly journey, or several days journey. Now the word journey is different. Journey has covered a traveling of so many days even. So the meaning of the word has changed, and sometimes the word remains the same but the meaning is changed. The word is same. Journey in the past meant one day. In the present it can mean maybe a journey of 1 year. So this is how the words are the same but the meaning changes sometimes. Transition of proper name to common words may also result in changes. Sometimes proper names are changed to common words, and that is again a transition. For example, the word boycott is derived from Captain Charles C. Boycott, who was land agent of Lord Ernest's estate, who was so treated in an attempt to get rents reduced. So boycott word was a proper name, was changed to a common word, boycott, derived from that Captain Charles Boycott, who was basically treated in an attempt to get the rents reduced. he was taken, the word was is now associated with that. The word boycott is now associated with that. The word dunce comes from the name of medieval writer Duns Scotus, who fell into disrepute. Dunce word associated with the medieval writer Duns, because then he fell into disrepute, and the word dunce was associated with that very writer, Duns Scotus. Euphemism. One seeks to distinguish the real nature of an unpleasant idea by giving it an inoffensive name, like bathroom or restroom for toilet, or latrine, stout for fat, visually challenged for blind. Now, visually challenged word is not really, doesn't have a negative connotation. So these are some of the words with some positive connotations, like the word unclean, for the opposite of clean, has a positive connotation. In contrast to the words like dusty or filthy or muddy, now these words have the negative feeling. They give us a negative impression. But the word unclean is a positive connotation. So sometimes you use positive words to finish the unpleasant idea associated with a word or associated with an activity. Like there is an unpleasant idea associated with bathroom or restroom. Now, for toilet, if you say toilet or latrine, that has an unpleasant idea. It gives us an unpleasant impression. So now, in order to finish that unpleasant impression, new words were coined, and now we call it washroom. Washroom is a word with a positive connotation or a positive feeling. So it gives us a positive impression. Now, this is done in order to finish the unpleasantness related with that word or related with that object or activity. So euphemism is a process. Euphemism is a change, kind of change, in which you give new words to some activities or to some objects just to finish the unpleasant ideas. In modern English, the front vowels are not rounded, whereas most of the back vowels are rounded vowels. So another change related with phonology, related with the vowels. In modern English, the front vowels are not rounded. When you write them in the terms of vowels or phonology or the sound, then the front vowels are not rounded in the modern English, whereas most of the back vowels are rounded vowels. So this is another change which has occurred in the language the change is related to phonology, change is related to phonetic symbols, in fact. So when you give the symbols to these sounds, you have a different way to give the symbols now in the modern English. In the early English, there were front rounded vowels, but in the late modern English, you have the vowels which are not, which have a different style for rounding. Metathesis could be seen. Another change, metathesis, that could be seen in some words like bread for the Old English and bird for the Middle English. Bird, if you see the movies which are about the Old English, or which are movies which are about that period, where the Old English was in fashion, you would see, you might hear somebody saying bread. No, that is B-R-I-D. That is, and again, change. When you move into the Middle English and the modern English, bird, then the word had a change in sound and a change in spellings even. So metathesis could be seen even in some words. Loss of R model. Immediately before consonants, and finally, unless the next word begins with a vowel, took place in the 18th century, although R was retained in spellings, for example, arm, heard, order. Now, R was there, but in pronunciation it was not pronounced. Weren't, now we say weren't for were not. Were not, we say weren't. So R model disappeared. Loss of R model before the consonants. Like you have R in the arm. R was there, it was retained, but while speaking we say arm. We don't say aram. We don't say heard. We don't say order. But we say arm, heard, order. So the pronunciation has changed, the R model has disappeared. Although the R is there, but it's not pronounced. The sound is not pronounced. Initial K and G followed by N disappeared in pronunciation in the late 17th centuries. Again, we have a new area now for the for knave, for the K or G, like you have knave, naw, nat, nash. See, I'm pronouncing knave, naw, nat, nash. K is there in knave, but it's not pronounced. G is there in naw, but it's not pronounced. Same way, nat and nash. So G is there, but the sound is not there. So initial K and G followed by N. When there is an N after K or G, K is not pronounced, G is not pronounced. Followed by N. So initial K and G followed by N, that disappeared in pronunciation. It was there, it was retained in spellings, but it disappeared in pronunciation. Spelling, a change in spelling now. A major reason for the variety of English spelling is that several different systems and conventions have been at work in this language. For example, mouse is a native spelling, mice is a French spelling. See, mouse and mice. English spellings, mouse. French spellings, mice. So the spellings are different here, but the word is the same, the meaning is the same, but the spellings of the words have changed. Latest experience, you people are experiencing this. You has disappeared now. In many of the words, like American English, they would spell favor with F-A-V-O-R, color with C-O-L-O-R. So spellings disappeared, but the word means the same. The meaning is the same, but some of the letters are disappearing. Same way, mouse in the native spelling, mice has different spellings in French English, in the language of French language. So you have a change in spellings, variation in the spellings. This was made possible by the fact that Old French S became C next to the front vowels. Now, why was this change of mouse and mice? Because in the Old French, S was changed to C. So instead of putting S in mouse, they started putting C instead of S. This was again because of a trend in French, and this was a trend that was used by the French writers. So S changed to C in French. There were no silent letters in OE, like Old English, OE, Old English. Modern English, you have the comparison of words C and then K and I, G-H-T, and night, K silent. There was no silent letter, no concept of silent letter in the Old English, whereas in the Modern English you have silent letters which are written but they are not pronounced. Under French influence, many Old English spellings were changed. We know that English was under the influence of French in this, and it took a lot of words from French and Latin and Greek. So under the influence of those old languages, English was changed, the spellings were changed. In the Old English, you would see that there were so many words with different spellings, but now in the Modern English we have different words, we have different spellings. So under the influence of French especially, English spellings were changed. You can see the example of night. In the Old English there was no concept of silent, but in the new Modern English we have silent letters. Examples: EO remained in spellings but became a monophthong. For example, people. Now, people is spelled P-E-O, P-L-E. You don't have the sound of O in people. People, like if you pronounce people, it sounds like P-E-E, but E-O is a monophthong. Monophthong was a single sound, people. O is not there. It remained in the spellings but was not spoken, but was not pronounced. Y was often used to represent I, for example, myth, or might, or Y. Myth for myth, might, and wise for wise. Now you see this change of spellings here. Might being spelled M-Y-H-T-A, M-Y-H-T-H. So Y meant, basically, Y was taken to represent I, might, might. So Y was I in the Old English. And then we have the new spellings, M-I-G-H-T, might. Same way, wise, W-Y-S. Y meant I, wise. Modern English brought reforms and spellings, for example, dropping the final E in many words. You have so many words where E is there at the end, but E is not pronounced. Care, C-A-R-E. And sometimes the final E is not there as a, it is written and it's not spoken. Care, C-A-R-E, whereas the last E is not pronounced. Alright, moving on to the next slide now. Accidents. We see another change now, another linguistic change. The history of English accidents has been one of the progressive simplifications. You see so many simplifications in spellings, sounds, and now let's see another change here. Several declinations of nouns in Old English have disappeared. Now nouns have different spellings. Nouns have different meanings even now. So several meanings, interpretations and sounds of nouns and spellings of nouns have changed in the modern English. Same way, the inflectional endings in adjectives and adverbs have also changed in the modern English. Syntax. Old English prose is undisciplined. Change of construction in the middle of sentences is quite common. Change of construction in the middle of sentences. If you read the old text, you would see change in spellings, change of construction in the middle of the sentence. And that is called undisciplined. People, the critics have called it undisciplined. The Old English, there was no proper discipline that where the structure has to be kept and where the structure has to be changed. So in the old text, when you read Old English, you would see many changes occurring in the middle of the sentence rather than in the start or the end. Sometimes sentences begin in the third person, but then they continue to the first person. Starting with the third person, they finish on the first person. So this is again an undisciplined way that the consistency of structure is not kept, or the consistency of pronouns is not kept, starting with the third person and ending on the first person. Modern syntax is more logical, more organized. This can be seen in our attitude to double comparatives, like double negatives and double superlatives. Modern English gives more importance to word order, and this confusion between the use of shall and will has also given way to apostrophe LL. So the confusion has been removed. Confusion between the use of shall and will, that has been removed by just using apostrophe LL. So modern English is much more disciplined, much more organized. There are no double comparatives like more, better, right? More, bigger. You just say bigger or better. You don't put more with better and more with bigger. Same with double negatives. I didn't do nothing. That is considered a double negative. So there is no double negative. Even if you if people use it under, you know, in the slang or everyday spoken language, sometimes you hear double negative. I didn't do nothing. Very common in the American movies. So that they have called a double negative. Like didn't do nothing means that I did something. So that is again defined properly, that it's a double negative and used in the mostly used by people mostly used in the street languages. So double negative, double comparatives or double superlative, the most, biggest, you don't say most biggest, you say biggest. You don't put the most with biggest. So most biggest would be wrong because it would be double superlative. So no trend of double superlative or double comparative. Synchronic variations. Synchronic variations are now are of course very familiar term with you. Synchronic, study of language at that very point of time. We're going to look at the first heading, that is the varieties due to language contact, and the next two we'll be talking about in the next lecture. So let's look at what varieties we find when we look at the syntactic, when we take the syntactic approach of the or the synchronic approach of language study. A language often comes in contact with another language. Naturally, Urdu coming in contact with English, Urdu coming in contact with Pashto sometimes, Urdu coming in contact with Sindhi, Urdu coming in contact with French sometimes. So you have languages coming into contact with each other. New varieties come into origin which continue to coexist along with the original languages. So you get some new words, you get some new structures, some new sentences which keep on existing, which continue existing, continue to coexist along with the old varieties. We said that the language changes are gradual, they are not all at once. So gradually there are changes coming because of the languages coming into contact with each other. So in sociolinguistics they are also known as transplanted or nativized or indigenized varieties. These varieties which are coming up because of the languages coming into contact with each other, we see that they are new languages, they are a mixture of the old and new languages, and in sociolinguistics we have term for them transplanted varieties or nativized varieties or indigenized varieties. Some varieties of English are Indian English, a general term that applies to any variety of English spoken in any region of India. For example, Tamilian English, Maharashtrian English, Bengali English, and so on. We have some varieties in India, some Englishes related to particular regions like Tamil, like Maharashtra or Bengal. So there is no uniformly consistent standard Indian language being spoken in the country, and that is the reason that many people who are good or who know good language or who are good speakers of English, they, as far as possible, they stick to the received pronunciation. They stick to the original Queen English or they stick to the original British Standard English, because there is no one uniform variety in India. So that is why most of the people who are well educated, they prefer the British English. Same way in Pakistan, we have so many varieties of English now. We have been given by Tariq Rahman in his paper. He's talked about sociolag, mesolag, the four varieties of English, different varieties of English coming up, like the English of people who are working in the clerical area or working in the lower cadre of the offices, people who are not educated, then people who are under the British influence, still they are sticking to the English which they think that is the original English. So you have so many varieties even in Pakistan, but still the people who are considered well educated, who are considered to be aware of the good English or to be having the knowledge of good English, they still are sticking to British. They are not ready to leave British. Some of them have started using American English, but still the people who got education here in Pakistan and especially of course in England, they still would prefer British English. They would prefer the standard British English. Even the teachers in schools and colleges in Pakistan, they still prefer the British English because they have been brought up and they have grown up speaking that English. They have grown up learning that English because it was a colony, you know, it was ruled, this part of the world was ruled by British for 150 years almost. So this was because of that influence that still those scripts are there, and in the official language we still have those files and those standard patterns of English, especially being used in the court, in the legal system. That English is very difficult to understand because you have very specific, very hard words there which come from the original British. So that is why people still here, and in India of course there is a Pakistani English as well. People are really writing and they are making a lot of efforts. People like Tariq Rahman, Dr. Riaz Hassan, all these people, they are working on Pakistani English and they are writing books, but still they would prefer that still it is in Pakistan the British English. People are sticking to British English. They are not ready to leave British English. So despite varieties, you have still the authority of British Standard English, but definitely the varieties are coming, and now people are working to promote their own varieties, promote their own Englishes with small e. In this process, a variety of regional English has come up, and that is how we have got so many varieties of English, the regional Englishes, which we call Englishes with small e, written with small e, because they are related to the regions and they have so many words from the native languages. Some lexical and grammatical items of this variety are, let's look at some of the varieties. Bed tea for morning tea, hill station for hill resort, bus stop for bus station, and cousin, brother, sister or for cousin, biodata for curriculum vitae. So these are some of the new words that we find in Indian English. Even in Pakistani English we say bus stop, we say cousin brother, we say biodata. Biodata would be used by people especially who believe, who have now coined this word, and they are using it, they're using this word instead of the curriculum vitae. The original word is curriculum vitae, coming from British English, and now from the local variety we have another word, biodata. It was developed here and it was generated here in this, people started using in this part of the world. So we have so many examples of Indian English, with so many examples of Pakistani English, where there are new coins and new coinings and new words which have come up because of the cultures, because of the new generations who are getting interacted with other people and with other people out in the different parts of the world. So that is why there are changes. Indian English includes hybrid compound made out of combination of English and Hindi. For example, police wala, Brahman hood, you have so many other words here. Like I gave you example of ISM, you put ISM with many different words and you develop it as a culture, you associate it with a kind of movement or a culture or a tradition. So in the same way you have hybrid compounds even in Pakistani English and in so many other varieties of English in the world. Syntactic changes, word order of question remains unchanged. For example, why you are going, why you are sad, why you are, where you are, when are you going. Instead of when are you going, you say when you are going. Very common in our conversation. We don't change the sentence to a question. We don't give it a question structure. So we just speak it, and we maybe put intonation in order to sound like a questioner. Like in order to make it a question, we just change the tone, the way we speak it, but we keep the same structure. When you are going, why you are going. In fact, it should be when are you going, why are you sad, why are you, where are you going. So when are you going. So that is the original structure. When you change it to interrogative, you put the helping verb, you put the verb to be after the question word or after the W word. In this variety, questions are marked by changing intonation. That is what I was saying, the intonation. You change the intonation and you make it sound like a question. When you are going, instead of saying when are you going, you say when you are going. But if this sentence is spoken plainly, you say when you are going. But when you want to make it a question, you say when you are going, you put stress on when. You put stress on the first word, just to make it sound like a question. So the question is marked by change in intonation, not by syntactic change. Irrelevant question tags, for example, you are going tomorrow, isn't it? Instead of aren't you, the actual question tag would be aren't you. You are going tomorrow, aren't you? But irrelevant question tag like isn't it. So this is again a change in the because of the local variety. Pidgin language, a special language with a very limited vocabulary and limited structures. We talked about pigeons in detail when we were talking about the different kinds of varieties of language, and this has limited structures used for purposes like trade. When people they come into contact with each other for business purposes, people of different cultures, different nationalities, they come into contact with each other for trade purpose. Now they don't have a language, they don't understand, and then a new kind of language it develops, and they can understand each other. They have developed certain words for certain things for this, so they understand each other, and that variety is basically called pidgin. People who have no link with each other, between themselves, they have developed a strange kind of language which they can understand just because to carry out the activities of trade or business. So that is called a pidgin. Creole. When pidgin language comes to be used for a long time, in any area, pidgin language being used for a long time, it becomes a Creole. It becomes almost a standardized language. It's then used by community at large. Like when pidgin language comes to be used for a long time by a community on the whole, and it develops its own vocabulary and structures, then that very variety has its own structures and different and its own vocabulary. There is a special kind of vocabulary and structure that only the people associated with business, or only the people who have relations with each other on business terms, who are dealing with each other and who are involved with each other in business or trade, they only understand those words, they only understand those structures. It becomes, then we call it a Creole. Creole is pidgin spoken for a long time, and it attains almost a language, a standardized language, a language of the community. It is a product of two different languages originally used by speakers. Basically, one speaker gives some words from his language and the other speaker gives some words from his language, and then they start understanding each other. They start understanding the words which one speaker associates with some objects and the other speaker also associates. So it's basically a mixture of two original languages being spoken by people of two different cultures or two different societies or nationalities. So that very language is called Creole. Creole arises when pidgin becomes the first language of community and begins to be used in wider range of communicative functions. It becomes a new restructured system, though not used in very formal context. Though it's not used in very formal context, but it becomes a new structured language. Example, Jamaican Creole, Haitian Creole, some new words in Creoles like zozo for birds, fingerfoot for toe. You see fingerfoot for toe, and picking for child, and so on. Some of the words which we found in Creoles, in different international Creoles being used in different localities like Haiti, like Jamaica. You have people coming into contact for trade or business, and they have developed these words. Then we have Esperanto. What is Esperanto? A theoretical language to be used by all people all over the world. Some people, they continue to make attempts to evolve such world languages based on vocabulary and codes of important languages in the world. So Esperanto, as people tried to develop Esperanto some years ago, and they said it's an international language which would be understood by everybody living in the world, and that it would be a mixture of all the languages in the world. But so far no such attempt has been successful. Esperanto, people may be working on Esperanto, but so far Esperanto has not attained an international standard, and people are still trying to develop a language which is a mixture of all the languages in the world, which can be understood by all the people. And that was the first part of the lesson, where we talked about the changes in language, and we'll be moving on to the synchronic changes again in the next lecture. We'll be talking about some more synchronic changes. Summing up today's lecture, we see changes. We saw that changes occur because they are natural, because human behavior changes, so the languages also change. And language in the state of constant variation, because it is transmitted from one generation to the other generation, so it's constantly changing. Changes are slow but sure, and they may not be noticed immediately, but they may be noticed after a long period of time. We cannot really experience it every day that the language is changing, but over a long period of time, certainly when the analysts, the language experts who have been studying languages for years and years, they definitely experience this change, and they notify that yes, these are the changes. They write papers, they write books on the changes, and then we experience that yes, the language has changed, and this was a language long time ago, and now look at the new words and look at the new structures, how different they are, how strange they were in the past, and how new and easy they are now. Sometimes it is unnoticed and becomes prominent over a long period of time. Changes are neither for good nor for bad, but just because of suitability, we need, because of needs, we need to sound different, we need to fulfill our desires, we need to interact with people of different societies, so we need to survive in the society, and that is why we start using new words just for just to survive in the society, or just to sound different, just to sound educated. So we start using new words, and that is how the changes occur. Language change can be studied along two lines. We talk diachronic, synchronic, and we saw the examples of Chaucer, Milton and T.S. Eliot from Old English, Middle English and Modern English. Then we talked about some of the diachronic changes, like meaning change sometimes due to its continuous use in particular context, extension, euphemism, metathesis, spellings, syntax. All these were different kinds of diachronic changes which have occurred over the period of time. Then in the synchronic variations, we saw that synchronic variations are in three areas, studied in three areas: language contact, dialect, register. They could be because of the language contact, because of the different languages of the world coming in contact, because of change in dialogue, because of registers. Today we talked about the language contact, how the languages they come in contact with each other, and how new words are coined, and how the pigeons they come into origin, how the crows they come into origin, and how people they find new words, they coin new words, and they which are mixture of their original languages. So this is what what was about the diachronic variations and synchronic. We'll be continuing in the next lecture with the dialects and register. We'll talk about the dialect, different dialects and different registers that have come up, and because of these the languages have changed. So till the next part of the lecture, it's goodbye from here.